Okay, let's talk about the Crosshatch tool in Mach 3. So I'm going to click on this icon up here, hover over it, it says Crosshatch, and it gives me this set of options. And as always available, if you click on the question mark, it will go through a help menu for these different sections of the tool. And so normally you'd be working from your sew head. Let's say that we've got a block with an embroidery in the middle of it, and I want to put some crosshatch into it over the embroidery or behind it. We'll do a couple of different options. And so I would use the sew head to click around the block, but I'm going to be using the mouse just to show it on the screen. And down here there's a couple of different settings. You can play around with these. Let's try 45, and I'll leave it at 1 inch. And you can choose freeform, which gives you plenty of options, although I think it works with or without this the same way. I don't really see any difference in it. And sew outer edges, which I don't tend to do because they're not always super accurate. And then I am going to leave continuous sew. It's going to try to find a way to go as far as possible without big areas that it would have to jump, stitch, and restart. And so let's say that I want to do clockwise around this block, and on the quilt, as can be the case, it's not perfectly square. So you can click as many times as you want, and it's going to put the crosshatch inside there. So when you're done, you can say accept. So there's a couple limitations to this tool, and I want to talk about that next. Before you hit accept, you can certainly play around with options on the degree, the angles in here, or the size of the crosshairs or the crosshatch. And so, it's completely adjustable until you hit accept, and then it's fixed. And what I want you to see is I'm going to go down here to sew options, and I'm going to do a Mach stitch out by hitting start, and you can watch how this is going to travel around. And the software really does a great job minimizing overstitching, which is super. You don't get a lot of buildup along the edge. And you can speed this up if you wanted to really see how it's going to stitch, but that could look pretty good. So there's some limitations to this tool, but I want to show you some workarounds. I'm going to go ahead and go to settings and snap to grid on. So it's very controlled as to where I'm going to click. It's going to snap to the grid on the computer, and you would not want to be using this if you're using your head to indicate these spots, but I just want to show you what might happen. So I'll go ahead and say begin, and we'll do it in a clockwise, and I'll click on these grid lines. And so it's going to place that crosshatch, and I'll say accept. And you can see that these triangles here along the side are different sizes, so it comes in a little bit tilted, and there's not really a way to control that. So, each crosshatch that you're placing in the blocks on your quilt might be slightly different, and that makes me a little bit crazy. So let's talk about a way around that. What I would do is, let's put this at 90 just so it's easier to see. And we'll go ahead and work on the computer screen, and I'm going to work way bigger than the blocks on my quilt. So let's go ahead and say clockwise again. And you can try counterclockwise. Actually, let's do that real quick so you can see the difference on how this will come in. Sometimes you can experiment to see if it is closer. So that's not too bad. That's actually lining up in the corners. So that would be okay with me. But if we go back to any sort of other angle, they might not be even. So here's your workaround. What I'm going to do is go ahead and take that snap to grid off, and we'll create another region. I'll go clockwise this time, and I'm going to make a much, have to hit accept. I'll create a much larger area of crosshatch, so bigger than what I'm going to need on my quilt. Go back to clockwise, and I'll come way out here, begin. And I don't have snap to grid, it doesn't really matter. So let's say accept. So I've got way more than what I'm going to need to use. But again, you can see that these triangles on the one side are not consistent. So my workaround on that is that after you hit accept, this becomes a pattern that you can manipulate. And if I go into transform and then make sure that the rotate angle is either 0.3 or 0.1 or some minimal amount, you could come in and use this rotation handle and adjust it to where I'm trying to see that this intersection lines up on a grid line. So you could, make as many tweaks as you want with it. And if you want to do it without using the rotation handle, you could also just say counterclockwise and get it fine-tuned to where you want it. And that's going to be bigger than what I need, but that'll be okay for the way I'm going to use it. Okay, we'll call this my block on my quilt, this square that I did. So what I'm going to do is, if I'll be doing many blocks, I will create a copy of this crosshatch. So I have the option of reusing that on another one, and I can bring it over and really kind of dial in how I want it to fit in that space. And once you do that, then we're going to go ahead and use the mask functions to trim this to the position that I want. So first we'll want to come in on the edge of the mask and unlock it. And if you can't select it now that we move this over, then let's see if I can get it to unlock. No, it's wanting to pick the pattern. You can go to your right click in your group manager, and I can choose the push pin pattern here that I created, and I want to unlock it. And let's see now if I can go ahead and select that. Yep, so now I have that selected, and I will go to the mask function, and I'm going to say build, so it turns that purple like we've talked about in other videos. I'm going to select it again so it turns it pink, and then I choose the pattern that I want to mask, and I want to make sure that I have outside checked along with continuous sew. You can choose to sew the outline. I tend not to because I don't want that thread buildup. And so then I'm going to say accept. And now I've got a pattern that I could reuse in my blocks that is spaced how I want it to be. So we're good to go on that. And you could do your test stitch out to watch how that's going to go. But that's a little bit more precise and lines up with the block in a way that I like better. And let's say that you have an applique in there that you want to trim around. So you would be using your push pin boundary on your quilt. And before I do that, what I want to say is if we're doing embroidery quilts that have stem stitching in them, I tend to do a crosshatch right over the entire block with a really fine thread, and it looks great. You don't see it over the stitching. And so if you have somebody that's trying to talk you into, trimming out the embroidery, it can just be a real time-consuming pain. And this ends up looking really good on it, so I'd encourage you to give it a try. But let's say that there's an applique that they don't want me to stitch over. So using your head, you're going to travel around the applique and do as many clicks as you need to keep those edges smooth. So you might be clicking in really small increments. I'm going to do it from the mouse just for demonstration. So let's say we've got a star on here that's pretty straight edges. It probably would never be that way, but I've got close one done, so I'll close it. And now we're going to want to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to go to my group manager and my push pin pattern. Click this little plus, come in here, and I want to unlock it. And so now I can select it, go to the mask feature. I'll close this. And now, mask feature. You want it selected and say build. it turns that purple color. And this time I want to remove the stitching on the inside of the mask, so I'm going to select inside, select the star again to turn it pink or red or whatever color that is, select the pattern that I want to trim and say accept. And so now I've got a crosshatch that goes nicely inside my block and outside of my applique. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go to the sew option down here and let you see how that's going to stitch out. Oh, it's doing this other one. Let's see if I can DQ it. And I think let's see. Yep, so now it'll show you how that'll stitch. And the nice thing is there are other machine softwares that it would come up to the edge of the applique, tie off, and then leap to where it would have continued before. But one of the really cool things about Mach 3 is that this reconfigures the path to be as efficient as possible with no tie on and tie offs. And so it really works out great. So we'll speed this up and you can see how that would finish off. So I hope you give the Crosshatch tool a try and do some experimenting with it, and certainly let me know if you discover anything cool about it.